Good day. This is the making of the John Batchelor Show. Thank you very much for joining. We have a world of disorder to seek resolution in the next few minutes. Welcome my colleague of many years and very good friend, Thaddeus McCutter, former member of Congress, now writing at American Greatness, from the great city of Detroit. And we begin with the headlines out of Europe, London being 5 hours now ahead of New York's remarks. Israel says it has killed Iran's top security official. Veteran conservative Ali Larijani was one of the regime key leaders and is now dead after key leaders after the assassination of Ali Khamenei. Accompanying that is the headline, Oil climbs as Iran steps up attacks across the Gulf, and Tehran prepares for a Persian New Year. A mixed bag of headlines from the Middle East saying that the war continues. I believe there's been a drone strike in a UAE against a tanker in these last hours. No details. There's also chaos in Afghanistan, Pakistan. The Taliban in Kabul is accusing the Pakistan Air Force of deliberately bombing a hospital in Kabul with up to 2,000 beds. The hospital said to be for people afflicted by addiction, opium addiction. And the casualty rate, according to the Taliban, is now 400 and climbing, as you see a burning building in the video. Back to the war in Iran, we have a uniform response from the major European powers over the last 24 hours to President Trump's request to join in keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. The uniform response is not until the fighting stops, or no thank you, or we're not going to enter into this contest yet. We don't want a wider war. Many versions of the no are coming in. No also is coming from Japan, Tokyo, from, to my knowledge, Seoul, South Korea, and surprisingly, from Beijing. The news is hard to quite understand. The president has requested a postponement of the planned meeting with Xi Jinping. It was to happen in early April in Beijing, in a neutral site, I'm not sure where. The president has asked for a postponement until the end of the month because of the war in Iran. At the same time, the president has now requested Beijing join in the patrolling of the Strait of Hormuz to keep it open for world commerce. Beijing has said no. It is an odd request given what we know about Beijing's conduct. And later on this morning, we look to be joined by an author and former head of the DIA, David Shedd, a longtime friend of the program, whose new book, The Great Heist, is about the People's Republic of China making war on the world, not only in terms of military power and aggression, but also commercial power, aggression, and theft. That is a very good day to you. It is discordant to report that the president requested China to join in patrolling the Strait of Hormuz, given the increasing detail we have that Iran is launching drones filled with Chinese equipment, especially the navigation brain of the drones that are hitting across the Arab world. It's peculiar. It's as if the president doesn't know what he knows when he doesn't want to know it. Can you figure this out? Thank you, Thaddeus.
Happy St. Patrick's Day to you too, John.
Oh, well, thank you. It was necessary for an Irishman to remind me. I beg pardon, Thaddeus. Please continue.
Perhaps the president's putting the Chinese on the spot by just asking them to come in, but in the end, we know it was not going to happen. These are the types of things you would hope to have been taken care of ahead of time. The threat to the Straits of Hormuz being a distinct possibility from a regime that is clinging and fighting for its life. And so you would go to your allies ahead of time and say, if we encounter problems with the Straits of Hormuz, who is willing to participate, who is willing to help defend it, who is willing to stand up to this type of extortion by the Iranian regime. That has not happened, and we seem to be scrambling at the present time. I think a lot of the pushback from the European Union, and Judy will have probably better insights than I will, but I think a lot of it has to do with Ukraine. A lot of it is the concern that the U.S. is spending time in Iran with armaments and with attention that they would rather see spent in keeping Russian aggression out of Ukraine. And so maybe this is part of a negotiating process, or maybe this is a hard no. At the present time, it is certainly not availing us in our fight against the Iranian regime.
I mentioned the price of oil is driving everyone's sense of time on this, rising again this morning to I think it touched 105 at one point. I was looking at the trading chart out of London. The prediction over the weekend was that it would go to 120. It did touch 120 last week in the first hours of trading. Not approaching that today yet, but 104 is bad enough. Who makes money? That's a complicated formula. The immediate benefactor of this is Iran, because the making war on commerce is far more effective than making war on even the capital city of your enemy, because the participants in the commerce are everyone, down to the least of us in North Africa, depending upon food subsidies this summer. And the greatest of us, the capitals of Europe, are all touched by the spike in energy costs. I talk to the south of France every week, and what you don't immediately see about farm country in France is that it depends on diesel oil. It's not subsidized. If they don't get diesel, the tractors and the farm equipment don't work, and the energy that is consumed by France can't make up for the fact that the foods are slow to get to market. There's another version of oil that I had over these last days from Brazil. Did you know that the apparent closing down of the Strait of Hormuz and the lack of energy coming out of Strait of Hormuz, having driven the price of oil to 100 and above, means that in Brazil, those who plant the vast sugarcane fields will convert that sugarcane not to sugar, but to ethanol to sell to regulated countries such as the United States, because you make more money. That will lead, I'm told, to a shortage of sugar soon enough. So everything, and sugar goes in everything we eat in America, as far as I know. It's very difficult to find a product that doesn't have sugar touching its production. So we're talking about a worldwide shortage of sugar soon enough. I don't know if I can say if the war continues. It's already disrupted everything, to my knowledge, that I read about. Thaddeus, your sense of timing on this, is it politics that's holding the president back? Is it strategic thinking that's holding him back from ending the conflict? Yesterday, he mentioned again the nuclear weapons program suspect in Iran, and yet the FT reported over the weekend that there was no direct attention to where we think the fissile material might be. There was no thought of landing special forces and securing it. There was no additional air power being directed against the underground sites. It's as if the president and his counselors can talk about the suspect nuclear energy program, but continue to pound Iran as if it doesn't exist. It's a puzzle, Thaddeus. Have you a sense of what the president's goals are?
Well, I discount a lot of reporting given the fog of war, and so that put that out there. I'm also concerned about the fact that the Iranians have to, as you pointed out, they have to disrupt the American economy. They have to cause discord and dissension amongst our allies, because Iran does not have the means to get the United States to stop unilaterally. They have to have assistance in getting the United States to stop. If the Straits of Hormuz are open, if oil starts to flow, the Europeans, again, are very afraid that our attention will remain on Iran. We will use our armaments in Iran, and we will pay less attention to Ukraine. Ukraine is their number one concern at the present time. If you have economic discord here in the United States, disruptions here in the United States, if there are disruptions in Europe, they can always blame the United States for that. They also have other concerns, domestic concerns, that they are trying to alleviate, trying to deal with, that do not favor the United States attack on Iran. So at the end of the day, we are in a very, very difficult situation. And how do you extricate yourself? It depends what the objectives of the administration are. As you go forward, we've heard various different accounts of what those objectives are, from regime change on down to simply degrading their ability to get nuclear weapons. I think some individuals have talked about how the attack itself will avail us in the future. It will degrade their military capabilities as well as their nuclear capabilities. I'm not so sanguine about that. I think that with the help of Russia and China, they can reconstitute much of their armaments in a relatively short period of time. Their nuclear program, I don't want the United States public does not want to play whack-a-mole for the next 20, 30 years with this regime. And so I think it was, for whatever reason, there was a lack of messaging, a lack of clarity, a lack of concise, crystalline objectives set forth by the administration for the American people to weigh. And I think it's going to be very difficult to extricate ourselves from this, accomplishing enough goals to make it worthwhile in the minds of the American public, let alone the rest of the world.
Suddenly, we're told that General Kane, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and his lieutenants were adamant to the president and his lieutenants that the Strait of Hormuz would be a target if you attack. This is in preparation for the war. We're told that repeatedly with this caveat. It could be that the Pentagon is quite wisely ring fencing General Kane so that he doesn't fall under the bus as we come to what went wrong and why. There are other voices that are less clear whether they participated in warning the president beforehand. The Wall Street Journal reported on Friday there were 4 men who made the decision. That's the way the Journal reported this: the president, the vice president, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Hegseth. 4 men. I note, if that's accurate, there was no Iranian expert in the room to speak to the history of the regime in Tehran. There was no representative from the Navy that was going to carry the load if the Strait of Hormuz was closed. And there were no voices of dissent in the room. That's the president's decision-making chain. We'll have much more of this after the war. I'm just giving what we have now. The easy conclusion, and I'm not going to reach it because it's so easy, is that the president didn't listen to the threat to the Strait of Hormuz, or if he did listen, he didn't account it as significant. That's not enough, but it's all I have right now, that he was warned and he discounted it, or he was warned and thought that the war would be over too quickly for that to come to a story. It's a big story now. And the reporting from the economists in Europe, this is Europe because it's 5 hours ahead of us. We'll have more today from the American economists and market watchers, is that this is a clear global threat of recession, clear. And they don't do hard timelines. If it goes on 5 days, then this. If it goes 10 days, then this. But opening the Strait of Hormuz is going to take time. If the rumors of mines are anywhere near accurate, they've got to clear the whole, demine the whole of the strait. And that it requires minesweepers. I learned from the FT that the U.S. fleet had 4 of them, or more, but the most of them were retired in January of this year. There are 3 or 4 out there now, 2 or 3 of which are making so-called logistics calls in Malaysia. No explanation to that. Why aren't they in the Gulf? And one of them is somewhere else. I don't recall it at the moment. I didn't write it down as a note. But it suggests to me, Thaddeus, that the Navy, having participated in these talks, was not told to have their minesweepers at the hand if the Strait of Hormuz is closed. I'm also told that the reason that the president is so insistent, the Trump administration is so insistent that he needs the European allies to participate, is that Europe is chock full of minesweepers. They have lots of them, given their inland waters and their shallow waters in and around Europe. And they're not in position to minesweep. Also, one more detail I read about the Strait of Hormuz, it's not deep, but the bottom is rough and sandy, or hides mines easily. So the demining will be arduous and take some time, even if the war stopped in the next 2 hours, which would be nice. That's my reading of this challenge now, that the Strait of Hormuz is not easily opened like a door again. Here's the key, you can go through. And once having done this, insurance rates are going to have to adjust to the possibility that it's not going to hold. Hence that tanker struck by a drone this morning in UAE, making it very clear we can hit what we want anytime we need. Now, that's all going to come to politics in the U.S. And I look to you to help me understand where the Congress is in this matter. I've not heard a strong voice. I've heard supportive voices from the Republicans and discordant voices from the Democrats. Do you see any larger story emerging from Washington about what this is doing to the American economy?
Well, at this point, first, regarding the 4 people in the room, that will require one of the 4 people to leak it out. I'm rather chary about these types of reports. We need more time to figure out what happened. So I don't like to put a whole lot of credence into these types of things. In terms of the Straits of Hormuz, you would think that the military contingency planning would have taken this into account, and those plans would have been prepared and at least presented to the president. Over time, perhaps the decision was we could degrade them to the point where they would not have the capability to do this, especially if we take out their Navy, which appears to have been the case. I don't know that drones were taken into account and the mining that has occurred. But again, time will tell on that as well. I think that one of the interesting things right now is the reality is that if Iran gets away with this, if they close the Straits of Hormuz, they will own the Straits of Hormuz. A terrorist regime controlling the Straits of Hormuz and the choke point of international commerce, causing recessions across the board, across the globe, is something that I would think that all nations would be opposed to and would certainly see their self-interest in trying to stop it. Yet we do not see that at the present time. Again, I go back to the fundamental point that I had, and again, Judy may correct me, but I think a lot of it has to do with their concern over Ukraine. And so the question to me is this an international negotiation or is this a hard no? And if it's a hard no, we need to know that immediately so that we can factor that into our strategic planning as we take the next steps, be they forward or backward.
I'm puzzled also about the future, given what we now know about the Strait of Hormuz and the war fighting. It would appear from the surface of the moon looking at the Earth that we've entered into a new time frame where, as long as the Iran regime is intact and adamantly opposed to the United States and Israel, we have to use the Strait of Hormuz as a risk factor. Does that make logical sense? As long as even a Cold War would not remove the risk of the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, they could close it at any time. If this is the precedent that is set in the present time, over the course of the coming years, they will threaten to close it any chance they want to. In short, it is one of the reasons they wanted nuclear weapons was to use them not necessarily to attack in the first instance, but to use them as a shield so they could export their terrorism with impunity and then threaten to use the nuclear weapons should they be challenged and checked. So what you're seeing now is, in addition to their hope for control of nuclear weapons to use as a shield, they will use their choke point and control over the Straits of Hormuz as a shield to continue to export their terrorism throughout the world, again, uncountered and unchecked. So they are now doubling their capability to export terrorism unless there's something done about this regime and something done about their behavior.
I come to as you talked, I come to a glimpse of something that I can't be certain it would be possible. We live with North Korea possessing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles to deliver them. We live with Pakistan and India having nuclear weapons. They could exchange at any time between themselves, but of course the whole world would be pulled into that contest. We live with the threat of nuclear weapons in some other countries over time. The threat, I'm not saying they use them or throw them around. Can we live with the threat of a nuclear weapon in Iran? If we can live with North Korea, why not Iran?
I think the phrase that was used, and I found this phrase particularly perverse and insidious, was acceptable level of terrorism. I don't think the Americans want to live with an acceptable level of terrorism. They don't want to live with the acceptable level of piracy in the Straits of Hormuz. North Korea is not threatening the Straits of Hormuz, or threatening a global recession. Plus, you have the PRC, the Chinese communists, on their border, making sure they don't get crazy with their nuclear weapons, because we know where it will redound to. So it will not redound to the benefit of the Chinese regime. So you have ways of dealing with these issues, but when you have a country that screams death to America and actually believes it, you have a problem. If they have nuclear weapons and continue to export terrorism and now threaten a global recession anytime they don't like something you do.
And yet we come to the point that all the king's horses and all the king's men have not reduced the regime's willingness to sacrifice in order to resist the American and Israeli onslaught. The next page then is not clear. For some reason, there's going to be a door ringing and dog barking behind me. This is a live show, and I have two spaniels who go crazy when the door rings.
It's too bad they're not Irish setters. You would understand their glee on St. Patrick's Day.
Well, the difficulty, Thaddeus, is that the delivery men here all bring treats. And so a deal of this is anticipation. Oh, goody, another treat. Let's make sure he notices us before he rides away to his truck. They seem to have calmed down momentarily. My other concern about the politics of this moment right now are that the midterms are in 8 months. Now, you've taught me over the years, 8 days is a long time in politics. Is 8 months enough to rearrange the polling, which right now is running in the other direction from the Republican majority?
Well, 8 months is. It's just a question. What is it? Was it Macmillan? Events, my dear boy, events. So whatever happens is going to happen. And right now, the dynamics are not are not favorable to Republicans, clearly. And if the Straits of Hormuz remain closed, the Iranians will have achieved their objective of creating economic disruption and recession here in the United States, and that will not avail to the Republicans' chances to hold their majorities in the House or the Senate. Now, President Trump being in his second term, unable to run again, that does not necessarily impact him directly in his conduct of this war, but it could cause massive drain of time and everything as the administration gets hauled before the dock in the United States Congress if the Democrats control it. So right now, I think things look rather gloomy for the Republican Party,
Right.
but there is some time.
Yes, there's some time. To do what, though? To achieve. Here's the puzzle about this, because the president has also made positive remarks about Cuba. We're told that there are negotiations underway that look to relieve that island of the persecution of the regime these many decades. And there are positive things to say about Caracas. There are positive things to say about Panama, having shed the burden of Chinese owners of both sides of the canal. At the same time, do American people vote on foreign policy successes? I know they vote on foreign policy troubles, but successes. Would that be enough to offset what appears to be a mixed to negative opinion of the Iran war?
In 2006, when Republicans lost the majority, I was there. And what you had was the insurgency in Iraq was reaching new heights. American soldiers were being killed. You had the Iraq summer, but you also had underneath it, you had the economy beginning to sputter toward what eventually became the Great Deflation. So you had war and peace were going against the Republican Party. So 2006 was not a unilateral vote on foreign policy. It was foreign policy and the economy, and neither one was doing very well, and that was enough to get rid of the Republicans. Plus, you had the Foley situation at the end. This period of time, you're looking at the twin pillars of a foreign engagement that the United States is very concerned about. And then you have the economy, which right now is something that they're very concerned about, the affordability issues. So it's two barrels staring at the Republican Party heading into the midterm right now.
And the presentation that was made by Mr. Boehner at the time, I believe, was your majority leader, was, as I recall you telling me, get out there and get on the media.
Well, that was when we were in the minority. That was the job in the minority. I've always subscribed to the fact that the American people are very practical people. And if they sense that they have something they don't like, they'll let you know, and they'll either tell you to go back and fix it, or they'll throw you out and find somebody who will. And there's no smooth talking and angry American voter.
No, we come back to the White House. The president and his counselors certainly know everything that we're talking about. This is about the polling. The polling now suggests that the war in Iran is not beyond unpopular, rejected by the American people as necessary. The administration has not provided one cause that must be solved. You went through a list of them before. We could add some more, but it comes back to regime change would answer, but that doesn't, at this point, more than 2 weeks into the war, appear likely. Can we imagine a less than regime change and the White House explaining it 8 months from now?
It's very interesting, and it's kind of off topic, but we've engaged in a communication revolution. We live in a period of time, Twitter, social media, X, and everything else. Obviously, the opponents of the United States know how to influence and how to get inside of that communication loop. The United States, when you engage in an action such as Iran, you have got to continually message. You've got to be clear, concise in your messaging. You have to be disciplined in your messaging, not only to counter what the opponents, international opponents and others and enemies of the United States may try to engage in that communications loop, but you have to convince the American people what you're doing is right, and you have to show that you're making progress along the way. And right now, that is not happening. And it should have been done well ahead of time and have continued up to the present time. Because it is information warfare in this day and age is an essential component of a successful military operation.
I'm not trying to imagine the future. I'm just trying to look at what we have for the remainder of this week and for the month.
Mm-hmm.
What we have is uncertainty. Markets hate uncertainty, and there's no easy way to explain it, except for I can cite the price of oil. That is, I can't find any positive here. I don't think I'm missing it. What I hear is louder and louder versions of what we're getting today. No, 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 stop the war. Is the White House going to listen to that?
It could be. If the question is, and we need an answer, is Europe engaging in a negotiation to get something they want, especially for Ukraine, or is this a hard no, period? And neither of us have that answer, and perhaps we'll get that answer soon enough. And from then, we can, not only this administration, but the American people can start to make determinations on the way forward.
Will the White House listen? I know this is a subjective opinion, but that's all we have today. Everybody's uncertain about it. If the White House is responsive to the polling, they'll find a way to exit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the question is, do you believe that this is an ideological administration, or do you believe it's a transactional administration, a pragmatic administration? All evidence shows that it tends to be more transactional and pragmatic than it does ideological. This is not we're going to build a model democracy in Iran. We've seen that in the operation in Venezuela. So I think I think the question is, what are they going to do? I think that they would rather, their entire agenda hinges on, I think, fixing the economy. Not only the remainder of the Trump administration, the survival of the Republican majority in the House and Senate, but also any potential chance that J.D. Vance or anybody else on the Republican side has of retaining the White House in 2028. It is, you were elected to fix the economy.
I'm glad you give me a transition. The economy is all about tariffs, about trade, about China. And we're very lucky to have someone here to speak to that matter, especially with the risk of dealing with the People's Republic of China in the marketplace. I welcome our colleague of many years, David Shedd, former acting director of the DIA, now a man who wanders the globe, and every once in a while he's able to come to us to talk about his new book, which is entitled, I have it right here, I'll show it to the camera, The Great Heist. This is about the People's Republic of China in the news. David, a very good day to you. Good timing, David. The president asked for a postponement of the summit, and you come on to talk about what's in the summit. Thank you, David.
Good morning. Good to be with you both.
Thank you. We've been discussing the Gulf, but far more critical for the future is the relationship or lack of that the president and Xi Jinping establish in these next days. And we're told by the White House this morning that the president has requested a postponement of the all-important meeting about tariffs that was to take place at the beginning of April, I believe. And that suggests that the president finds the war in Iran more demanding of his time than he first anticipated. So let's move to China and talk about it just a moment. Whatever was in this negotiation, it must at some point touch on what your book very carefully explicates, China's epic campaign to steal America's secrets. The reason in particular I asked you to come with us this morning, and I'll start the recording just a moment, David, because this is the making of the John Batchelor Show. You've been on before. You know, we're talking behind the scenes before we step out on the stage, is the article in the Financial Times entitled, let's go, it's about Brazil, but it's right on target for your book. Spies and subsidies. China joins Brazil's $20 billion delivery app war. Local courier group iFood and China-backed Kita trade claims of corporate espionage and underhand tactics. I was right to link this to your revelations. Is that correct, David? This is the same game they're playing, that instead of for state secrets, it's commercial secrets.
That's exactly right. And what's really interesting about this story, and I did some research with some Brazilians and leading up to today's conversation, who have dealt with the iFood issue in Brazil, is that now this is the combination of technology through, think about Uber Eats, the equivalent of that, of doing your food ordering in a market of 220 million people. It's a massive market in Brazil, in which the Chinese now blend the technology, the cutting edge technology, and in getting a foothold into this enormous market in terms of I think it's somewhere in the $20 billion according to the Financial Times. And so it's a really interesting twist to it. And then, of course, they apply all the kind of things that we lay out in the heist of our own intellectual property in trying to get that foothold.
Well, with your permission, gentlemen, we'll begin recording. This is for the show later today of this article and what we learn from it that is useful to understand that no one is not at risk. You don't need to be a member of the government of the United States or any particular state to be targeted by Chinese practices. So here we go. Thank you both very much. Thaddeus, you hear David well?
Yes, very well.
David, you hear Thaddeus well?
Perfectly.
All right. Thank you. 5. Oh, Thaddeus, you've checked off those boxes that we talked about the last time. Is that correct?
Right. You're not hearing anything, are you?
A little buzz when you talk, but not much. No, it's much better. Just checking. 5. Am I recording? Indeed, I am. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm John Batchelor. I welcome my colleague and friend, Thaddeus McCotter, American Greatness, and we turn to China and the People's Republic of China's practices of industrial and state theft of secrets. In a new book, I learned The Great Heist by David Shedd and Andrew Badger. This is a campaign that the Chinese have perfected over many decades, directed at any organization or person they want to either dominate or learn from. The subtitle tells the tale, China's epic campaign to steal America's secrets. We welcome David Shedd this morning because we're on the eve of a postponement of a conversation between the President of the United States and the leader of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping. And we can assume that industrial theft, commercial theft, theft in general, will be part of the discussion and has been leading up to this meeting of the two. I welcome David to comment on this, not only because we're talking generally about secrets, how do you build a better drone, but we're talking about money. Follow the money. And there's this headline in the Financial Times these last days that I brought to the attention of David and Thaddeus. Spies and subsidies. China joins Brazil's 20 billion delivery app war. Subhead. Local carrier group iFood and China-backed Kita trade claims of corporate espionage and underhand tactics. What does that look like? At a franchise office and vendor, 20 people or 8 or 9 or 10 or 20 people showed up suddenly claiming to be from the corporate headquarters and buzzed around asking secrets about how many customers you serve, what the day's like, who are your best delivery men. This is the fast food call up, get it delivered to you business, and took pictures all around and left. Later on, it was revealed they had nothing to do with the corporation, the Brazilian corporation, and the suspicion is that they were sent by the Chinese subsidy. However, nobody can prove it, and it turns out that spying isn't much of a crime in Brazil. David, a very good day to you. We had a lengthy conversation when we talked about your book, and we talked the last time about Chinese actors stealing industrial secrets or manufacturing, especially when it comes to national defense. Is it relatively new that they're stealing secrets from other businesses, or is this just part of the writ that I missed initially when I talked to you? I thought it was about existential risk. This looks to be about fast food. Good day to you, David.
A good day to both of you. Delighted to be with you here. Look, what we're looking at is sort of a playbook that China has now been using in the West that blends technology, and this would be through a particular app that is very prevalent in China that is led by Didi. Think of Uber Eats in the United States, in which then they have these companies. You mentioned Kita, but it's also 99 Food coming into the Brazilian market, a very lucrative market valued at somewhere in the $20 billion annually of fast food deliveries around there, in which iFood, being the Brazilian company, is now really under at least their claims of attack of economic espionage against them, and criminal investigations now have been opened up in Brazil over this issue.
That issue, I have a question for David.
Well, David, I've often thought of things like TikTok as a dual use technology. It has both espionage purposes and potential military purposes if the event ever came. The Chinese regime has a reason for collecting any information, don't they? It could be the most innocuous information, but they put it in and vacuum it up. Is that accurate?
That is entirely accurate, Thaddeus. What you see in China is a machine driven to collect personal data. And if they're able to shape and think of the power of artificial intelligence sitting atop of that data, they will know not only what you like to eat, but when you want to order it, when you want to send it to a neighbor or to a friend, and they literally vacuum that up in terms of doing this. What we see in this Financial Times story that John alluded to is a story of economic espionage on the collection of personal information, but also business-like information about the competition and the market. Think of us in terms of our values. We would go and do a market assessment or a market survey, see where the competition is and all that. It turns out, at least the investigations, and I mentioned these criminal investigations that are underway, they are looking at spies within the iFood sector of that company. We have, as John, you laid out, pretending to be part of another company, and they're using consultancy companies to go and do this, but then they leverage that data in terms of economic espionage that ranges from the privacy of individuals all the way to the corporate espionage that we're talking about, and the Great Heist lays out in great detail in terms of multiple examples of what they're doing.
I missed the scale of it, David, and I'm glad I'm catching up, because behind all this is a bad actor. Is that bad actor state security?
It is state security. Remember, there is no distinction between the civil military apparatus of China and the Chinese Communist Party, which numbers in the 80 to 90 million members, runs everything in terms of both what they wish to collect and then how they process that information in order to grow China through by any means possible that they can identify. And this is just one more example in the case of the Brazilian food delivery market, that they have gone in and used economic espionage to gain a foothold in a very, very lucrative market valued at somewhere in the $20 billion annually, in a 220 million population. So it is by far and away the largest market in South America or in Latin America in terms of the what winning looks like if they were to gain this access.
The Chinese national executive who's quoted in the piece, his name is Qiu. I'm going to say it Chu. Is there any way he would not know that state security has a hand in this?
There is no way that he could bypass that. And in fact, we know because the National Intelligence Law of 2017, Article 7, it requires that every Chinese entity and every Chinese citizen, both at home and abroad, cooperate with the state apparatus and in terms of the Ministry of State Security, if and when called upon. There is no way that he would not know that this is supportive of the Chinese regime.
Thaddeus, you have a question.
Well, David, we've heard the regime has talked about unrestricted warfare against the United States and our interests, strategic and otherwise. But with Brazil, this really is a declaration of unrestricted mercantilism, isn't it? That they're going to, whatever they can do to increase the Chinese economy at the expense of other nations, regardless of international law or international norms. Is that not correct?
That is absolutely correct. What you see in this, and this really becomes a case study of what Chinese will do to gain market access and then control of that market. And by the way, they are doing this in the mining sector in Brazil. They're doing it elsewhere in all sorts of other economic activities in gaining this foothold with the support of the Lula administration in Brazil, the president of Brazil and the Workers' Party. So here's an enablement in terms of the proximity that he and the Workers' Party has sought to have with China, now gaining this foothold, which now is paradoxically leading to criminal investigations. Where those go, that's to be determined, but still it's telling you this reach and the mercantile mentality in terms of gaining these footholds in the economies of these countries is very real and a clear and present danger to them.
Is there any reason to assume not to assume that this is going on in the United States? That it isn't? You don't have to be a maker of jet engines. They could identify any business as doing well, and sharp elbows come into the business.
I'll give you a great example that's currently underway. They're buying up robotics in the United States at a rate and speed that is just absolutely stunning. They go in and they buy up a company that's struggling in the area of robotics, and they are coming in and buying that up. And now what they'll do is they'll have a front company in terms of that investment. They get majority ownership of it, and then they gain control of it. They're doing it in the United States. They're doing it in Western Europe. I was talking to someone in the case of Hungary. They are coming into the Hungarian economy under President Orban, and they are buying up small and medium-sized companies at a rate that is just absolutely stunning in Hungary. Why? Because that will become a platform in which they can reach into the greater Europe aspects of the economy and the economic union from that standpoint. So it really is global, and we shouldn't be thinking about this as a single country or a single region, but rather it is a global reach with predatory economic both capabilities and wanton disregard of any kind of business practices that the three of us and your audience would say is clean or otherwise conducted in an ethical manner.
That is, you have a question.
Well, so kind of a question, but David, when you're dealing with the PRC, people forget that under communist ideology, the state owns everything. They're the vanguard of the proletariat. They're going to usher in go from socialism to communism. The myth that somehow you can be detached from this regime and engage in operations internally, domestically, or internationally, that's just a myth. It's a lie. It's propaganda from the regime. You are beholden to that regime if you are a Chinese actor in the marketplace. Is that accurate?
That is not only accurate, but it is a pervasive driver of how the Chinese economy has been growing over the last 3 decades. And I take the audience back to 1984 when Deng Xiaoping really in Chu Enlai talked about this managed capitalism in terms of the socialist, ultimately communist state under a single party edict in terms of driving what we see today. And then the architecture most recently of that has been the last 10-year plan, which was driven from 2015 by Xi Jinping, called Made in China 2025, in which they literally put out the requirements for the Ministry of State Security to go and collect these things by any means possible, whether it's old-fashioned economic espionage with a human penetration, whether it's through cyber or whether it's through other means of collaborative contacts in academia and research labs, and all of that is all part and parcel of reporting back to the state, as you say, and everyone is beholden to it.
We're speaking to David Shedd, the author with Andrew Badger of a new book, The Great Heist, China's Epic Campaign to Steal America's Secrets. When we come back, what is to be done? I'm John Batchelor. I'm John Batchelor with David Shedd, the author with Andrew Badger of the new book, The Great Heist, China's Epic Campaign to Steal America's Secrets. My colleague and friend and co-host, that is Makata of American Greatness, is here with me. David, you close your book on an optimistic note of a scene at the National Security Council level, a meeting with the president, and what is to be done in meeting with the Chinese going forward, how to deal with the threat that apparently is ongoing, not only to the United States, but all of our allies, all of our potential allies, even our frenemies. And there's a meeting between the two leaders scheduled for the beginning of April, but is now likely to be postponed for another month, about tariffs, which China very much wants to negotiate to its favor. And the U.S. at this point is unclear to me what the goal is other than negotiating. What are the recommendations if the president is to go? What are the recommendations that would be wise for the National Security Council to write up for the president to present to Xi Jinping?
A few thoughts come to mind, but let's put it in context. The context is, for the first time, and I believe it's about 3 decades, China's economic growth will fall under the reported 5% or greater than 5% in gross domestic product this year. And so it's not meeting its targets. I believe it's around 4.5%. And so Xi Jinping is concerned about an economic recession, if not worse, in terms of China. And obviously, the tariffs are an issue related to that. By way of recommendations to the president, I would certainly say be open and transparent in demanding an end to this type of economic espionage that is taking, according to former FBI Director Chris Wray, upwards of $600 billion in value in our intellectual property. Secondly, make it very clear that we will play hardball when it comes to criminal prosecutions of anyone found to be involved in this in terms of Chinese citizens or anybody else that are associated with this in doing this in the United States. Thirdly, that we will harden our cyber capabilities because we know full well, and I don't think you have to reveal sources and methods, but you can certainly identify with these typhoon attacks, the Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon, these attacks that are going into our infrastructure, that we must see an end to that. And we must be very clear in telling President Xi that this is unacceptable for anybody who wants to talk about any kind of economic partnership going into the future.
Dennis, you have a question.
Well, David, isn't there also a demographic Achilles heel to tweak with this regime? I think their population now is the second largest in the world behind India. India is a growing, developing economy, a great marketplace for American goods. I would think that one of the strategic necessities of the United States is to become more friendly with India and to work on that relationship, which then puts some pressure on the Chinese regime too, that you're not the only market in town for American goods anymore.
That's correct. And I would say even the greater Asia or Asia Pacific region is one. We see it with Vietnam. We see it in terms of alternative markets, not only for our goods and services, but also for our production. If it's not going to onshore to the United States, those are great alternatives. And I believe, for example, Apple has been looking at India, not only for production, but also as a very expansive market in which the very population of India appears to be overtaking that of China, above the 1.4 billion people. And so for us to strengthen that partnership and really steady as she goes with India, I think is really a very, very valuable direction for us. And the added dimension of that is the longstanding relationship that India has had with Russia. I think we could also benefit from having that strengthened in terms of driving a wedge between India and Russia, which is a historical relationship going back for decades. And so there's multiple reasons. And then finally, I would say the partnership, which is known as the Quad with Australia and Japan, is one that would be very powerful in terms of investing in it, in that Quad with India as well, in terms of the Indo-Pacific region.
David, we have 30 seconds. Do you have reason to believe that this matter will be part of the discussion when the two presidents meet?
I'm concerned that I believe the president may overlook wanting to be confrontational on this issue. I would hope that he would be, as I said earlier, open and transparent about it. But because he is so transactional in the way that he approaches the issues, there may be some avoidance on a topic that I think is absolutely critical to the United States.
The book is The Great Heist. David Shedd and Andrew Badger, the authors. Thaddeus McCotter. I'm John Batchelor. There, David, we got it done. And one more time, it keeps coming up. Last time you were away and we weren't able to talk about that young man who, David, I have a puzzle. That is, I'm just recovering in a few minutes here. That young man made no effort to conceal the fact that he was boasting all on air with his family, spreading money around, that he was suddenly recruited by state security. They had to know that. They were watching him the whole time. And when he was eventually trapped by an FBI sting, it was very straightforward. There was no hiding the fact that he was a bad actor. Was that on purpose for state security to put a guppy out there to let you catch him while something else got away?
That's always my fear, and it's as a career spy, I can tell you that if you can get a little shiny object, a little guppy, as you describe, out there, he might very well be covering for, or they may be covering for something far more dangerous and far more damaging that's going on in the background. But we'll readily go in the direction of the guppy in exchange for that. The other aspect that we can't forget is the Chinese are brazen. There is very little effort to hide their activities in terms of what they're doing. These are lost leaders. The guppy is the lost leader to something much greater.
They're that good. Really,
They're that good.
That's Le Carre good. That's
Le Carre good. Yes.
Thaddeus, did you run into Le Carre good at that point when you bumped up against the Chinese?
Well, we were always dealing with their abettors here in the United States. One of the interesting things, David, that I find fascinating is this regime really just continues to build upon its failures and try to learn from them. When you think about what Mao tried to do that inspired the Great Famine and the Great Despoliation of their environment, they were still selling rice to increase their foreign reserves so they could engage in foreign policy while their people were dying. And so what Deng Xiaoping and Xi Jinping, what they've really done is just tried to improve upon Mao's failure to find the right way to do it. And unfortunately, they seem to be doing it right now. They've built up their foreign reserves, and they're engaging in diplomacy and mercantilism and unrestricted warfare throughout the globe. Sadly, I think they've started to find a formula that works for them, and we've done really little to counter it.
And the value of a human being in China is extraordinarily low. I mean, they don't mind, and it has its parallel with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. The fact that a few thousand or a few 100,000 or million die is just sort of baked into the whole concept. And as you so accurately describe, this leadership of the proletariat of the Chinese Communist Party, an atheistic construct of the social fabric of China, is everyone reports into the emperor ultimately, and the party is the emperor.
Stalin was the same way.
Same way. I mean, they lost millions and millions of people, and my concern that Putin isn't all that different in terms of the war casualties in Ukraine. They're just, and the tolerance for pain is extraordinarily high.
Marco Rubio was read in on this. Is he acting as National Security Counsel in anticipation of these matters?
Yes. Yes, he is.
That's positive. That's a positive.
Yeah. But what we really need is for them to be talking to Matt Pottinger as well. Someone with the real China. Rubio doesn't pretend to have the Chinese expertise in that. And I'm hard pressed, apart from Radcliffe, finding anybody in the administration that really is fixated on the China problem.
Is that because they tend to be transactional?
Yeah. Yes.
They don't understand the role of ideology. At least Marco gets that. Marco's solidly anti-communist, obviously.
Yeah, because of the Cuban framework.
But if you're going to go in transactional and deal with this on just strictly a business basis, that's exactly what the regime would want.
See, and the transactional example is the whole Russian oil to China. We've let it just get through, and it's probably going to accelerate now because of Hormuz and the region in the Middle East.
Oh, yeah, the shadow fleet is afloat with no restrictions whatsoever. David Shedd, Andrew Badger, The Great Heist. You want to scare yourself to go to sleep, read some of this. Thaddeus McCotter, American Greatness, The Making of the John Batchelor Show. Here comes the Roman music. Thank you very much. See you in 23 hours.